I also want to give Chris Marks as one of the people here, and Chris and I have been having quite a dialogue. He's working with TestFest on similar projects to what the Rashomon is about, and he and I have had really, I feel like they've been constructive and productive conversations, and you're actually going to see some of his work later on in the slideshow when we talk about the incident reports and things like that. So I really appreciate his support with that kind of stuff. So it is just about 9 o'clock. And since I know a lot of people registered for this and then are planning on watching it later on, I'm probably going to start right on time, and you guys will get the benefit of having something start on time. I don't have a set time limit for this. I'm hoping, I budgeted 2 hours. I'm hoping it'll be less than that because I don't want to keep everybody up too late. If it's more than that, that's fine. We can talk about questions and answers and stuff like that. So I will be going through, basically, we're going to have roughly 4 sections. One is going to be why we came up with it, why we felt there was a need for Rashomon, even in light of some of the current existing mechanisms for accountability. We're going to talk about what went into creating the Rashomon, where we drew from our resources and things like that. And when I say we, I'm talking about myself, Iron Temple Dog, Eternal Angel, Lonnie Angel, no relation, and Dragon Imris also put in some input to develop this particular role. It's only been done once in our Ropecraft event that we had in Austin, and it will be an element in future ones. We're also going to talk about not only the logistics, the protocols for it, and the logistics of how it works, but also I will be telling you about an actual experience that happened at Ropecraft where the Rashomon had an influence and the system was put to the test. So the first question, we're going to switch now to the screen sharing so that I can show you. The first question that everybody asked me is, why do you call it Rashomon? Why is it called Rashomon? Well, Rashomon, as you may or may not know, was from a 1950s movie by Akira Kurosawa. And it was a movie that was pioneered. As you can see, it also had Shibari in it. It was pioneering because it told a story from the perspective of several different people, and you didn't really learn what actually happened, which was a crime, until you had everyone's perspective. Now, in the over half century since then, this technique has been used in all kinds of TV, movies, books, everything like that. And it's also become known as the Rashomon effect, which, of course, I'm quoting Wikipedia here, which is that you can have multiple people telling their absolute truth about something, and they can all still be wrong. So that is the basic idea. We also are going based on an idea that the majority of the people in the kink community are not actually predators. That the predators, while they exist, are the exception and not the rule. And that the fact that we have a lot of consent issues tends to come from the fact that we are not well educated in either negotiation and consent issues themselves, or in how to deal with them when they go wrong. And so those are 2 premises that we start out with. Now, the NCSF, National Coalition of Sexual Freedom, has several guides for groups that are very useful things to read. These are 4 of them that they have. And they agree that groups and businesses, we have a responsibility as people who produce events or who go to events, or even perhaps just even as individual kinkster citizens maybe, we have a responsibility to fix these problems. Now, the issue I have with these guidelines, they are very, very useful for one particular purpose, which is covering your ass. There are very, there's liability issues for groups dealing with consent violation. The NCSF, which is an organization I wholeheartedly support, is in the legal business. They're in the issues dealing with things between law enforcement and the law and these kinds of issues. So that is a part of the thing that happens. Now, the Minnesota Kinky Youth Group is a fantastic organization up there in Minneapolis, and their group, Minky, learned the hard way that the thing they had in place was not adequate for a situation that they had. And they worked very, very hard. I actually interviewed Lookout on my podcast, the Ropecast, about what they did. And they worked very, very hard to totally reconstruct and refigure and change the way that they reacted to consent violations and things like that. And so that kind of thing is... Are people not seeing this, by the way? I mean to present this to everyone. So let's just make sure. Did everyone see the previous things? I'm going to look for the chat thing to make sure. And you're seeing it now? Okay. Hopefully we saw the things before. All right, good. Thank you very much. You know, you get what you pay for on these things. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and make sure I can see all of the different parts as well. All right, so as I was saying, the Minnesota group, they had a lot of things that they learned the hard way of what they needed to do. I'm not sure what that particular thing is, but they do say in their policy that they based it on the NCF guidelines. And that's what the NCF guidelines are for, so groups will have something that they can use. But I have some problems with it myself. Okay, and I'm going to try and, of course, now my computer is, of course, not wanting to work. So we apparently are now, of course, having technical difficulties. So I had some difficulties with the things that the NCF guidelines were saying, and I'm going to talk about them as soon as I can pull up the slide. Ah, now you're seeing that too, aren't you? All right. All right, so the first problem I had, and I'm going to be trying to talk while at the same time trying to restart the image that I had here. So we're going to force quit that. All right, so hey, look, it's me again. So the first problem I had with the NCF guidelines was that one of the things that they suggested that you do is you get the side of the person alleged to have committed the violation and any witnesses if there are any. And so here's my first difficulty, is that the wording of that automatically is going to be, let's make sure if we can get this happen here. I'm going to ask one more time for people to let me know if you are seeing the NCF guidelines picture. And I'm looking to see if somebody says they saw it all along. Okay, so I don't need to worry about the thing there. So can everyone see where it says problems with NCF guidelines? Yes, awesome. Okay. So here's the problem. They're already using the word sides. They're already using the word violation, and they're already starting to use this legal terminology like alleged and stuff like that. As we said in the very beginning, it is entirely possible for two people to be completely telling the truth, but also be wrong. Just because one person tells a different story than another person does not mean that one person is lying. It's possible that both people are mistaken or one or the other is mistaken. So there's also a problem with just the logistics. I mean, we've been at events. The logistics of actually getting reliable witnesses, unbiased, reliable witnesses. I mean, professional law enforcement has trouble doing that, much less, you know, us being able to do that. So another problem that I had with this was they recommend that you don't bring the complainant and the alleged assailant, notice again there's that legalese, together and have them confront each other. Now, I don't believe necessarily that bringing people together automatically implies confrontation. Again, I feel like it's inflammatory language there. And also, I sort of feel like there's a measure of choice here. To some extent, if you are insisting, no, you absolutely cannot see each other, you cannot see each other, you cannot see each other, you're removing their consent. And yes, it could be an issue of safety, but it also may be an issue of safety where they do need to be, brought together to talk about things. So I feel like there are some issues with the way that they portray that particular thing. And the final problem I had with the NCF guidelines is this idea that they say, do not attempt to do a mediation. And I understand, this is that covering your ass thing. The minute you try and do a mediation, the minute you try and do that, you are instantaneously opening yourself, your organization up to vulnerability of a lawsuit and things like that. Totally an issue. But that being said, if this idea of not mediating, of not doing things was an effective strategy, you would not be here tonight. I would not have spent hours working on this. There wouldn't be 68 people signed up to watch this thing again later on. One of the things that came up in the discussions when we went over the NCSF guidelines as we were developing the Rashomon program, and when we discussed the idea of not mediating, I'm like, well, wait a minute. If we separate people, we are doing a mediation. That is a form of mediation. So, if your policy is you have to be hands off, well, then you have to not do anything. And that just really doesn't seem like a viable strategy to me for these kinds of issues. So one of the things that always comes up when people talk about going beyond the let's just believe, I like to call them the DNA or didn't happen crowd on one side, the ones who say you have to report it to the police, you have to do these kind of things. And the other side, which says that the alleged violator is always wrong, is the idea of false reports. And it gets brought up on one side, people are like, well, hey, there's a huge percentage of false reports. And the other side says, no, there's hardly any percentage of false reports. And the thing is that, again, both can be right. The National Sexual Violence Resource Center has an extensive report in it. And the quote for that, they do say, and they admit, in reality, there's no way to be able to tell really how many sexual assault reports are false, especially since, there's in relation to how many sexual assaults there are, since the majority of them are not actually reported. But there is a particular study that was done in 2009 that they often sort of hold up as a meta study. And this is useful because the percentages, when they look at all of the studies that were done, they go from the ridiculous 90% of them are false to an equally ridiculous 2% are false. And they often cite this particular study, which was done, and it was kind of a meta study of studies, and therefore it was a little bit more reliable. And in that study, they say 2,059 sexual assault reports happened, and there was a 7.1% false report rate. Now, to highlight the complexity of this issue, this report starts out by talking about all of the difficulties and flaws and problems with the current way that the law enforcement deals with sexual assault reports, whether they define it as legitimate rape or something along those lines, and how horribly flawed that is and how we need to not use that. Unfortunately, they then, to get this statistic, they rely on a report that is completely drawn from those same law enforcement policies. So it's a really complex issue. They also, I confess, there's a method they're using here that is commonly known in the way you present things, and that is that if you want to divorce humanity from a report, you use a percentage instead of an actual number. It's why they don't say 20% of women will have a sexual assault, they'll say 1 in 5 women, because you can picture in your head 5 women. You can't picture 20% of women. So when they say a 7.1 false report rate, they are divorcing themselves from the actual number. So I actually worked it out, and the math comes out to 146 people that year were falsely accused. Now, some of you may have heard of a number called Dunbar's number. And Dunbar's number was a sociological thing, and the number is actually 148. And the 148 is the number of people that you are cognitively able to hold in your brain and really care about and understand their relations to each other. It's about 148 people. So I would put this into a different context. If everyone that you know well, every single person that you know well, was falsely accused of a sexual assault last year, you might identify it as a problem that needs to be taken care of. Now, please, I am not saying that we need to shift focus and only think about the false reports. I'm saying we need to step up and take care of everyone. Maybe it's the Marine in me, no man left behind, but I do believe that it is important that we talk about people, not percentages. And that's part of why we came up with the Rashomon, is that it's not about getting one there and one the other. I'm going to pause here because Chris had an interesting thing. Yeah, he points out that it's even more confused, even more complex than what we're talking about, because there are unreported assaults and unreported false accusations too. So yeah, relying on just the we already know that they're flawed law enforcement statistics really doesn't work so well. So that's why we have the Rashomon coming up there, and why we thought that was useful to do. In preparing for this presentation, I came across an incredibly valuable resource that I wish I had had when we were coming up with the Rashomon, not because it would have changed anything, but because it would have made me feel a little more confident in what we're actually doing. And that is this particular book, which is The Revolution Starts at Home. And this particular article is called Taking Risks, Implementing a Grassroots Community Accountability Study. And it has another another issue with the idea of what is of just ignoring those false ones, or just having a policy of whoever is accused of it, we're just going to assume that they are most likely guilty. And that is the idea that we are dehumanizing them. And as they say here, if we separate ourselves from the offenders, we fail to see how we contributed to conditions that allow violence to happen. Now, I can already hear the people that are saying this is victim blaming and this is me being a rape apologist and things like that. And I'm sorry if they feel that way. I personally believe that that contribution is much better than blame, and that the idea of just taking things one at a time is treating a symptom instead of treating the actual illness or the conditions that are doing it. So this particular report, which is, I highly recommend everyone reads it. It's so good. They talk about this idea of setting up engagement with people, and we're not trying to find out, oh my God, what is the thing that actually happened? Just the facts. Tell me what really happened. That's not as useful as finding out what people's relationship to what happened is. And that can help give you a way to figure that out. So a common scenario that we will have in an event, which is why things like this are being caught up, is that you'll see at the top there, two people have a disagreement, have an incident. I always say something happened, and this may be a violation, this may be a lot of things. I am not going to prejudge it. I'm going to say something happened, okay? And usually those people will then immediately go to their particular tribes. And there you see there, they talk to the tribes, and they will often go immediately to social media of various kinds. And oftentimes at the afterwards, that it's through social media is where the event staff are first made aware of things. Even in situations where there is things set up like a board or a situation, or I've been at many events which are getting much better about this, and they will say, if the event manager, the person in charge will get up and say, I really take this seriously. I absolutely think it's really important that we talk about these kinds of situations. And if something happens, you come to me and you tell me what's going on, and I will do it. Well, the difficulty with that is that if the person in charge is the one who is designed to do that, that person has a lot of other things on their mind too. And you are putting someone in that situation where they go, well, I want to talk to them, but maybe I shouldn't bother them. Maybe I'm making too big a deal. I don't want to disturb them. I don't want to do this. So while I applaud the shift in focus and the fact that a lot of events are really saying we are taking this more seriously, and setting up boards and things like that, I really felt that there needed to be a dedicated role at events, which is where we came with the Rashomon, where their only job is to deal with consent incidents, much in the same way that a DM's only job is to help promote safety in the dungeon, or promote a good environment in the dungeon, or that a medic on staff, their only job is to respond to medical emergencies. Nobody worries about bothering a medic at an event with a medical problem, because that's their job. That's what they're there for. So the alternative scenario that I was hoping we would create was something like this, where people and their tribes, their support people, would go to the Rashomon. The Rashomon would be able to gather the information involved and either immediately have resources such as the police, the EMS, whatever may be needed, hopefully not the fire department, and also be able to talk to the event staff and give them a summarized, I won't say unbiased, but as unbiased as can be done, report on things. Now, you'll notice on here that the social media is still there, and it is available to everyone, as it should be. It's the fourth estate, it's free speech, it's all those things. What the Rashomon is not designed to be is a way for an event to control spin and things like that. It is designed to try and keep things constructive. The idea is that, yes, if people go to social media, well, the people who are involved, the actual people involved and their close friends, will at least already feel heard by official event staff, as opposed to feeling like the only resource they have is to go off and spread news, and write some flame war on something. The event staff will have access to social media, and they will have an informed perspective of what has been going on, rather than having to take guesses and things like that. And most of all, the people, the crowd at the bottom, the other attendees, yes, they also have access to social media, but at least they will have an idea that something is being done. One of the common situations we see is that people say, well, they don't care, they're not doing enough. And they may not see that the event staff is tearing their hair out and going way, spending time up nights and having committee meetings trying to get stuff done, but they don't necessarily know that. So the idea is that the Rashomon simply acts in the same way that an EMT does. It is a person who is there to try and reduce the damage that might be done, while at the same time not keeping people from taking the action that may need to be taken. Okay, and let me see where I'm at in terms. I think this might be a point. Yes. So with that in mind, I'm going to just go to tell you what our prime directive is, which is that the purpose of the Rashomon is to bring everyone to a place of mutual understanding. Okay, that is the goal. Notice I do not say it is to bring people to a place of mutual peace and happiness and harmony or anything like that. It is to bring everyone to a place of mutual understanding. This is a good part where I can pause and ask, are there any questions yet about why we felt the need to create this protocol in the first place? I'm not seeing any questions, so I think I'm going to continue on. I will also say that hopefully you understand that from those marks, those spreadsheets, those aren't spreadsheets, from those diagrams, that this is not designed to replace some of the mechanisms and protocols that people have in place. For example, this would not be in place of a Minky process of dealing with consent violations. This is a first responder type of role immediately at events that is there, okay? And that way you don't have to, they will help bring things to the event staff or the community processes that are in place already. So that being said, let's go to, I just decided that I wanted to lighten things up a little bit. So I don't actually have Matt Damon's permission to use his face here, but I think it would be a good movie. You know, it sounds like it would be good. I know that it's something that Naya would really want to see. She is so excited about the next Bourne movie. But this next section is where I will talk about the nuts and bolts, what we actually worked out for what we would do in case of a consent incident at the event, okay? And the very first thing, the overarching rule that we go in there with, when it was, we know that something has happened, we trust everyone's intent until it is clear that we cannot. Okay, now the people that we have as Rashomon are no strangers to a lot of different conversational techniques, and we're going to talk a little bit about things like nonviolent communication and stuff like that. But more to the point, they're all very well versed in the classic dodges and logical fallacies and things like that that people will try and use to dodge the truth. So if they are talking to someone and that person starts showing those kinds of behaviors or those really defensive things, it is going to sort of raise the probability that we perhaps cannot trust their intent. But from the very beginning, we start out, we trust everyone's intent. And I want to especially give credit to Iron Temple Dog, who came up with this particular method of saying the principle. We went round and round and round with it, trying to figure out how we were gonna say it. So this is the thing that we like tattooed on the inside of our eyelids in order to make sure that we kept this in mind throughout the process, okay? A great deal of the rest of our policies and procedures, Saving Private Martian, came from research really valuable. The Virtual Knowledge Center to End Violence Against Women and Girls, which is a really, and I think some of my events have a mouthful, but you can Google that. And it's also a part of the UN Women's Project at unwomen.org. And their policies and guidelines for conducting interviews with people who have been through sexual trauma and violence were very, very instrumental in this. So if you're wondering where we got some of this stuff, that would be where. All right. So the first thing we did was we wanted to consider that we wanted to have safety. And this does follow the guidelines of the NCSF, that we would separate the parties that were involved. This meant that we had dedicated rooms, more than one, because we assumed that there would be, at least 2 people involved that were there. The first issue, though, is safety of participants. And this not only involved separating them, but also, looking at seeing what toys they may be carrying that could imply violence or that we had with us. Another thing we did with the Rashomon to select the Rashomon was we tried to have diversity in as many ways as we could, gender, orientation, age, sex, all of these things that we could find, race, to try and make sure that if someone felt more comfortable with someone of a different demographic, we could provide as best we could to that. We also had preparation to, arrange medical treatment for any injuries. I have to give huge kudos to my medical team, Kink Medic, MecDoc, Bella Luna, and not Bella Luna, Bell, and also Epona Legray, who were all very well versed. They actually didn't have to do much more than use Band-Aids for the entire event, but they were very aware of what we were doing. Okay, so the other thing was informed consent, and this is kind of an interesting thing to realize, is that, and this kind of goes with that whole idea of separating people, is that let me go back to actually camera here. Hey, look, I'm sweating. You need to make sure that the people involved actually want your help. You need to be able to accept a no. Now, that doesn't mean, obviously, safety comes first. If somebody's like, no, I have to talk to that person right away, face to face, and the other person doesn't want that, well, you have to respect that. And you can certainly recommend that's probably not a good idea. But we also made sure that we had alternative resources. We had already established ties with a place called the safeaustin.org, which was a place for victims of sexual violence to go to. And we had other social service agencies. We had ties to the police department that we could draw on if we needed to. As I said, we wanted to make sure they were comfortable talking to someone. If I show up and they're talking with me and they say, well, I don't want to talk to you, you look just like the person who assaulted me, then we would find someone who did not look like me and could provide things with that. We also would make sure that we informed all of the participants in terms of our procedures for confidentiality, which were pretty extreme. We were bound by the laws of the state of Texas because that was where the event was. But outside of legal proceedings, everything that they say was kept private. Now, I'll be the first to admit this is an area where we are in shaky ground because we do not have attorney-client privilege or any kind of medical client privilege because we are not professionals in that way. So we could have been forced to testify on a stand or something like that. This is where it goes into being risk aware. All of the Rashomon and myself were aware that this was a risk that we were taking, and we were willing to take it in order to do this. So it is something to make sure everyone is aware of. Okay. So any questions about the idea of safety that we had there? I will pause and enjoy some wonderful Wisconsin coffee. I'm not seeing any questions. There we go. Legal hack. Penderbound says Rashomon could get Universal Life Church ordained and use that as privileged information. That's an interesting idea. I suspect that any lawyer worth his or her salt could run right through that pretty damn quickly. But like they always say, a fig leaf may not offer much protection, but it's still a fig leaf. So that's an interesting idea. We should look into that. The idea of perhaps becoming ordained counselors for the Church of the Rashomon. Oh my God, this is scary. Okay, moving on. Part 2 was, now we have safety done. Now it's time for communication. And I'll leave this up for a while so that you can hopefully laugh at it. This is where we go into the idea of interviewing the different people involved. We were able to have enough people on staff that we could basically do the interviews simultaneously. When I talk about the incident that actually happened, there was sort of a primary lead running things, and then she had people supporting her, and all the information was gathered and discussed and things like that. So we were able to, oh, it's not sharing that. Haha, I went on you're all not laughing at the thing I was going to share because I didn't share it. So I'll share it now. There we go. Now you can all laugh. So the thing that we're really looking for is we're looking for the point at which potential consent violations could have occurred. I'm sure I can't be the only person who has had the experience of talking with a friend about a situation. Miss L, I'll get to your question in a moment. Talking with a friend, and as you're talking to them, as they're telling you what happened, you're realizing that was a consent violation. That what they did right there. In fact, at one point I was watching an MC at an event, and they were doing something that seemed totally fine in terms of the audience enjoying it and the people up there enjoying it. And I realized that what he was actually facilitating was a consent violation. Before I continue talking about communication, Miss L has a question, which is how do logistics of this work if there are only 3 people on the event doing this? Like what if 2 of them are in scenes or stuff like that? I will actually be getting to that when we talk about the logistics of this. Right now we're talking about the protocol. I'm going to address that exact question when we talk about logistics. So stand by, Miss L. We'll be talking about that. All right. So going back to communication, we really needed to be, and this is where you really, I was lucky enough to get people who had experience being in counseling, in mediation, in basically putting on their professional face no matter what you are thinking of inside. These are 2 quotes from the 2 of the Rashomon for a Ropecraft event. We had a Slack channel that we were conversing on. We spent a lot of time going back and forth and discussing things and bringing resources in. These are direct quotes that we were talking about. This idea of no plans, no judgments, no preconceived notions. Of course, there is, unless you are a fictional character from a Robert Heinlein novel called A Fair Witness, you are going to have some preconceived notions and things like that. However, by knowing that we are going to have those things, we can at least try a little harder to mitigate them, okay? We spend a lot of time talking about nonviolent communication. I'll be honest with you, the other picture I almost used here was the guy who invented nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg, with a stuffed giraffe on his head, which is pretty ridiculous. So there are some times when the nonviolent communication gets just a little bit too woo. But the interesting thing is that nonviolent communication, aside from being a good way to avoid confrontation, is also a really useful interrogation technique. It's a great way to gather information and to figure out where people's actual motivations were from. Because if you are presenting yourself as a sympathetic, at least someone seems to be hearing what the person is saying, they will try and tell you that. Or they'll try and spin it somehow, and bullshit detectors work pretty well as well. So the idea is that we don't confront people and say, you're a bad person. And this is relevant, especially when we get to the actual case study that we have. So I want to make sure that we are realizing that nonviolent communication, the hardest part of this is that when there is someone who you internally believe is actually the person who violated the other person, or if it's someone who you don't, let's say you don't believe that the person was violated, you have to put that underneath and just be open to listening. That is your job, is to listen, as the Rashomon. Now, again, from that UN Women website, they have a couple of pages, guidelines for interviewing survivors of sexual assault. And these things came in really handy when we were trying to make sure that we had an idea of what to do. And as it says, this is adapted from the International Association of Chiefs of Police. You will notice that, yes, once again, we are going back to the law enforcement community. For all of their faults, which they do have quite a few of them, they are most of the time working to get better. with obviously some exceptions that I won't go into right now because we might have some people who live in those particular communities. But they are trying worldwide. In fact, a lot of these policies came from Uganda. The Ugandan police force has done a lot of things. So one of the things is to make sure that we pay attention to what their immediate priorities are. You may sit there and be like, well, I want to see if I want to find out what happened. I want to find out what happened. And they may be like, I need my stuffy, I need my daddy, and I need to be in a corner with a jar of whiskey. I don't know what I'm thinking there. But you need to not be violating the person's consent. If they don't want to be there, you don't force them to be there. You build a rapport, and there's a lot of different ways to building a rapport, ranging from body language techniques to mirroring to the kinds of language that we may use. For example, we would never say, what is it that you think happened? So that we wouldn't say that, because at that point we are trying to sort of second guess them and make them feel a little bit less heard. And in a way, it can be what's known as gaslighting, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. It is the idea that it comes from another movie. Oh, glad the feedback was fixed. Okay, that you don't want to make someone feel like they are crazy. And that particular thing, gaslighting, it is entirely possible for a person to gaslight themselves. And part of the job of the Rashomon is to keep that from happening as well. Definitely ask if they would like to have a support person present. This is not about isolating people. And here's the thing, it's not about isolating either person involved. Okay, yes, you may be putting someone in there who is going to make your life more difficult. That's too bad. Your job as a Rashomon is not to have the easy time. People who are involved are the ones who are the priority. And so if they want to have a support person present, they can do so. It's also important that we recognize that they are in the midst of trauma. Again, on both sides. It is traumatic to be accused of a violation. Not as traumatic, I'm just saying it is traumatic, as it is to have been the subject of some kind of an incident or violation. And this can, when I say recognize the impact, I'm not saying, you will have an idea of how this will affect them for their life. Have an idea of how it affects them at the moment. Okay, they may not remember details of the incident. They may have a hard time talking and being coherent. They may even seem like they are under some kind of substance abuse or things like that. These are all kinds of things that can affect. And I'm going to, yes, absolutely get to that, Leah. Leah says, it is important that the support person does not speak for the person affected. Yes, it is. And that's one of the trickier things to do, is to be able to shut them up without saying, shut up, I want to hear this other person. Because if you attack their support person, well, at that point, then you become the enemy or the man or whatever. You're doing that. So it's another one of those tricky things of listening to what they're saying and then redirecting it back to the situation. So yeah, this Chris Mark says, do you have strategies for handling that third-party support person? Redirecting and reframing, and without disagreeing. If the support person says, well, this is what happened, I saw this, and this, and you say, wow, thank you, that's very good information to have. So is that what you think happened? Going back to the person, does that go along with what you were saying? Can you give me any more details about such and such? Or, do you think that's what's going on? It is important to, this is where the nonviolent communication skills really come in handy. So going on, the next technique, providing participants with resources. Now, that's one of the more important things, is that you need to give people choices. And that may be a matter of saying, hey, we can go, and I can go with you to the police department because you might want to file a report. Or it could be, we can go to the event coordinator, or I can go buy you an ice cream sundae, whatever it may be needed at the time. But make sure that they don't feel trapped and that, oh my God, this is the only place, is the only thing. You want to be the best option that they have, not the only option. And that will help give them also a sense of power. And if someone has a sense of power, they are less likely to lash out, to be more desperate, and that kind of situation. So going on, we have one more, which is not to pressure the participants. If at any time either person says, fuck this, I'm tired of this, I don't want to do it anymore, you don't get to say, no, you have to stay here until we're done with the situation. That's just not, legally, we can't say that. We have the power to eject them from the event. We also, one of the ways, the things that we would do is, if we were going to deal with a possible instigator of a situation, we would basically say, look, we are gathering some information. We would appreciate it if you would not start any new scenes until we've gotten to the end of it. Okay, and that would be a case. The other thing that can happen is, this is where security can come in handy, because you can say, I want you to keep eyes on this person, so we can make sure they are not going to do anything else to anyone else, while they're in the event space. Obviously, you can't follow them outside of the event space, again, where there's this level of legal barriers where people don't lose their rights as citizens just because we think that they did something wrong, or they were involved in, or because we think that we have a way to help them. They can choose to do what they're going to do, and we have to respect that. So these are synopses of the guidelines. Again, I have the resources, the links later on, and you can also just look them up at the unwomen.org website as well. Okay, so before we go to number 3, let's make sure we answer the questions adequately. Chris, I mentioned briefly the idea of handling the third-party support person. For the most part, if the third-party support person, the idea is that the third-party support person wants the individual to be heard as well. And most of the time, they will only be interrupting if they think you aren't listening to the person. They will let the person have their own voice. And the presence of that person can also be just a calming influence on the person, whichever side is involved. And again, here I'm even going into these sides. Whichever person is involved. It's hard to reframe the thinking of that. So I'll give another few moments. I'm see if there's any others. These are all to facilitate communication with the people involved in the incident. Yes, these are particular techniques. This is so that you don't slip into Columbo mode. And I realize I'm dating myself by saying that. I'm not sure. I don't watch enough crime. Maybe Criminal Minds mode would be a way to put it. Even if you are a investigator for a living, this is not the purpose of Rashomon. You are not on a fact-finding mission. This goes back to that idea of, we aren't looking for the objective truth about what happened. We are trying to gather information about the people's relationship to what happened, their intent, what they believe happened, and you'll see in a second where that's all heading. So these techniques are in order to keep from things being confrontational. Chris says, it was our plan if the support person was giving testimony of witness and interfering with the involved party, to ask them to talk independently to a consent reconciliation facilitator. Is that what that was again? I can't remember what CRF stood for, Chris. But the idea was that ask them to talk independently to a CRF. Yes. In other words, if somebody else had something to add to things, or they had their version of events, you would interview them separately. Absolutely, that would be a wonderful situation to do. And I think that is something that can be done on a, either if you have enough staff on duty right then, or this is something that is done not by the Rashomon. This is something that is done by the committee, whatever is set up by the organization at a later time. The issue we have here, again, we're thinking of Rashomon as first responders. Their primary focus is going to be the people who are actually involved in the incident to try and keep them safer. Are you saying that Rashomon must leave the event and go to the police department and or family court to serve as a victim's advocate? No, I am not saying they have to do or must do anything. I am saying that they are there to mitigate things. And if the Rashomon themselves is comfortable with saying, hey, you know what, I really feel like you should go to the police department and file a report. Your support person can go with you, or if you want, I'll go with you to just be there. That's the only thing that you become a support person. You know, the victim's advocate and stuff like that, perhaps there are legal ways to work that into the Rashomon role, but that is far beyond their mandate. These are think again, first responder. Okay, a victim's advocate would be something like a paramedic level. Okay, where they have lots of medical training and lots of legal protections that in case something goes wrong. I'm not saying that any kind of must. And then when we get into legal things, as I told you, Rashomon are sort of putting themselves on the line because they may be called in as a material witness. And that's pretty inconvenient when you're at an event and you come from another continent, as one of our Rashomon did. Tornus says, or Zhang says, how do you balance between privacy or even anonymity and a person's right to understand, know what they are being accused of? So I see two different questions there. Privacy and anonymity in a legal sense, we're going to address later on. In terms of not being known what they are being accused of and things like that, that is one of the cases where we do default to the person who feels that they are violated. The way it would go is we would ask them, you know, so I'm hearing what you're saying. I would like to talk with this other person that was involved. Do you mind if they know that if they know that you were talking about this? And if the answer is no, well, then you're faced with a much more difficult situation because you have to go to that other person. You can't just let it go. You have to go to the person and say, look, I know you've been doing a lot of stuff and something has been brought up. Can you tell me if there has been anything recently that might have not gone quite the way that you had intended, or you know that somebody might have had some difficulties? Now, if the person's only had one scene, they're going to know who it is. There's no way that you can change that, but you do the best you can. One thing that is really, really frustrating me about this, doing this kind of work is, for example, I had someone recently say that, tell me that education about rape culture and things like that will not prevent consent violations in the community. And I totally agree with that. It will not prevent it. I believe it will reduce it. I believe that it will help lessen it. It will help raise awareness. There are no perfect systems. There is no way to guarantee that no one will know that a report was made. There just isn't. So what we do is we do the best we can, and we learn from our mistakes, which we had some, and we try and do that better. That's how we do the balance. The balance is the best we can. Chris says, the plan was to ask the secondary party if they had an interaction and if something went awry, or how well the interaction transpired and may not have been a result of a scene. So, Chris, I'm gonna go into at the very end a question that Flickr Flame has actually emailed me before, and the answer to this one is sort of the same as the other. issue of gathering those kinds of facts and stuff like that, I feel falls outside of the Rashomon mandate. Okay, this is where if we think back to that diagram, where the Rashomon at the event would go to the event staff and say, hey, guess what? There's this support person who I think would have some good input later on. We can, if we have the time at the event to do that, that's great. But again, trying to get all of this stuff together is pretty hectic. And that's something else that TestFest had to deal with, was that, that kind of thing can really take up a lot of resources, even when you think you have something in place to handle it. So, yeah, the fact that things can have history, obviously people don't suddenly materialize out of a vacuum. There may be patterns and things like that. That is not really the Rashomon is for the in the moment situation, because there are lots of different procedures and committees and stuff like that that different events have. The Minky thing is very comprehensive. It just takes a while to get from the moment of the violation to where things are getting reviewed. And the Rashomon is made to go in between that particular time. So, and Chris, yeah, Chris has run into the same problem of the accused party, as he is referring to as the second. Oh, I see what he's saying. He's saying that the plan was to ask the second party if they had an interaction if something went awry, or how well the interaction transpired. Yeah, and he also brings up, it may not be the result of a scene. Consent violations do not have to be just in scenes. They can be in many different forms. They can be harassment at an event. They can be in a class. They can be done by a presenter in a class, unawares. They could, or awares for that matter. There's a lot of different places that it could happen. And yeah, Chris is saying that one way to try and preserve the anonymity of the person who is doing the accusing is to sort of say, so did anything happen that we should talk about? Now the thing is, their defenses are immediately going to go up, and so this has to be a situation. But one of the other reasons that I will suggest that a Rashomon is a better model for having that kind of conversation is because of that whole idea of being unbiased. One of the problems with addressing this kind of situation is that oftentimes the person, well, every single time, the person who is accused of something has friends, has people who they just don't want to believe that they can do that they could have done that thing. And it's really, really hard to be able to hold in your head this idea that, hey, this person may be my friend, my mentor, my teacher, and still have done that consent violation. That's a really difficult place to be, especially if you are a friend. So that's why a person who at least has the mantle of, it's my job to be unbiased and a gatherer of information, not an advocate per se, but a gatherer of information in non-destructive ways, may be useful. Miss L says, how do you deal with the expectations of the two parties involved? This goes in with that informed consent idea. They are told at the very beginning, I'm just here to try and get an understanding of what happened. That's the only thing that we're here for. The other way we do this is we try to tell people before the event about the role of the Rashomon. And I'll talk later on about that. We didn't do a terribly good job of that, I think. I think it's something we could have done a lot better. And something we intend to do a lot better. I'm doing this particular webinar. But in terms of expectations, you mean expectations in terms of outcomes? Is that what you're asking, Miss L? And Chris, did you ever say what the CRF actually stands for, by the way? Didn't see that. And apparently there was the same, yeah, okay. So yes, okay. So yeah, Miss L, I'm going to address that more individually, but the short answer is this is actually an early criticism. Before we even had the Rashomon, when I was talking about the idea, one of the very early criticisms was the idea that we would be so presumptuous as to think that mutual understanding was enough to be a resolution. And the very easy answer to that is, it is not designed to be a resolution. It is not at all designed to be a resolution. It may be a it may end up that there can be a resolution done, and if so, that's great that it was that simple a situation where the expectation was, I want an apology, and the person says, wow, I'm really sorry. Okay, problem solved. But that is definitely not the design. The design is not to have a resolution, it's to have a lessening of the damage. Okay, it's to prevent further damage from getting out of control, and hopefully have some constructive communication towards finding a resolution later on. So that is something that we definitely do. I mean, one of the questions that we ask people is, what is it that you want to see happen? What would you like? And that answer may be, I want to go to the police. I want to file charges. I want to sue the event. And you say, okay, here's the name of the lawyer. Here's the address of the police station, the providing those resources. Or the answer may be, I want that person banned from this event. Okay, you say, well, I will definitely take that to the people who have the power to do that and tell them that that's what you want. And then that process is set in place. But it is a means to a constructive resolution, not a resolution in and of itself, unless you get really lucky. So, and the CRF that Chris Marks was talking about was the Conflict Resolution Facilitator. And one of the large part of the discussion that Chris and I have been having is about the idea of a name, of trying to find a good name for this, because Rashomon has its faults, because people go, Rasa what? Rakshasa? What is that again? And at the same time, if it's abbreviated to CRF, even somebody who's been talking about it can't remember it. So we kind of said, I think Chris and I, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, we had the idea of saying it was a conflict resolution facilitator, colloquially known as a Rashomon, so that you don't have to say into the walkie-talkie, get us a CRF for a conflict resolution facilitator. You can say, get us the Rashomon. How about just facilitator, Miss L goes, well, the problem with that, at least at my events, is that my events often have open spaces, and the people who run open spaces are called facilitators. That wouldn't work for us either. I see people going in with alternate names. I will leave that to be another discussion, because we have more stuff to talk about here, which is the third thing. There were only 3 factors. Remember, the first one was safety. The second one was communication. The third one is understanding. Okay, and this is where I mentioned before that we need to be careful not to reframe things for people, and not to bring in additional information and act as if we know and they don't. And I can now go back to that screen share so you can see what I'm talking about. There we go. So yeah, we don't want to say that they don't. We don't contradict. We just possibly give more information. Do you think it's possible that they were thinking this? And if somebody says, no, I absolutely don't think it's possible, you say, you could be completely right. And that's why we're talking about this stuff. Okay. So there's that is the thing is the idea, though, is that the reason why we have the Rashomon there is that hopefully the Rashomon can identify the points, I'm skipping ahead there a little bit, that Rashomon can identify the possible points where there was that misunderstanding, okay? Where the person's like, well, they grabbed me in this place that I told them they shouldn't grab me in. And what they don't know is that the person was blocking a errant single tail or trying to keep them from falling over or something along those lines, but it wasn't communicated well. In those places, then the idea can be to put it in mutual understanding. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a solution or it's going to be a happy one. They could be saying, look, I just want you to understand, this person thought that you wanted to have sex with them. They were wrong to assume that. And that totally can still be an angry response. And we're not trying to solve it, but as Chris said, it is much better if it's an idea that it could be that kind of thing. And the idea of the Rashomon is that they also use the technique of, can you tell me what you think they were feeling at the time? So let's say that we're in a situation and I'm saying, okay, here's what the person thought happened. They thought, they feel that you trespassed their boundaries. Can you understand why they would feel that way? And if the person can be like, well, yes, I can understand why they'd feel that way, but I don't think I did. That's fine. It's not about coming to agreement. It's about coming to mutual understanding, so that then at least when the person comes up again and says, well, you're still saying this thing, at least they understand why they're saying that thing. It's not coming out of the blue. It's not becoming rumor or mongering and things like that. By all means, there's going to be people that still argue it, and it's not going to be always a resolution or solution, but you do what you can, okay? The final thing we would do is we'd have an incident report and follow-up. And this is where I got to get to thank Chris Marks. He has come up with a actual really comprehensive form. This is just a segment of it, by the way, for people to go through. There was, like I said, one incident at Ropecraft, and I do have a very professionally done a report from Eternal Angel, who was the one who handled, the primary person who handled it. And this is very similar to what they would have been able to fill out. I like the fact that it has the stuff in the ID number and party number 2. I will say that this is where we run into a lot of the privacy and legal issues. Because at this point, you are creating a paper trail that can be subpoenaed. You are outing people. You run into all kinds of privacy and legal issues that our community, I mean, they would be a problem in any community, in our community especially, that can really be a difficulty. One of the ways that I have, one of the reasons for using this system is because it helps establish patterns of behavior. And that, by the way, is a very, preponderance of evidence is the burden is the standard for guilt in civil trials. Whenever somebody says, well, it's innocent until proven guilty, that's in criminal trials. In civil trials, it's a preponderance of evidence. And if you see this kind of thing happen when one person finally comes forward, and that's when a lot of other people finally have the guts to come forward. If they had all put in their reports and they were in a safe space, perhaps the violator could have been stopped. This is very useful for people who either are that predator that we all worry about, or that other person, the person who's clueless and doesn't realize that they are violating consent because they're never told that they are. And I think it's a wonderful thing. I don't know how to solve the ID number. I will throw out there one of my ideas, and it's probably one of the more controversial ideas I've ever put out there, was the idea of having a public registry, a consent registry. And it's not, if you're thinking, yes, and if you have a consent violation, then you're in the consent registry. No, everybody's in the consent registry. In fact, it's a voluntary thing. I tell you, yes, I have it on my FetLife profile. My consent registry number is 7458. And anybody can go onto some database. Maybe the NCSF keeps it. Maybe the Leather Archives and Museum keeps it. I don't know. And they can sort of see if there have been consent incidents involving me. And I don't know how much information you would have there, but they could at least see it. It's kind of like a credit report, okay? And basically what that would do is if somebody had a lot of those things, then people would have the idea of when negotiating. So you see, you have 4 consent incidents in your record. Can you tell me about them? Can you tell me what happened? And if the answer is, oh, a bunch of crazy people, they're idiots, well, that might be that warning signal. Now, there are all kinds of difficulties with the idea of a consent registry. But the idea of having it be a voluntary and opt-in situation is that if somebody doesn't opt in, then you can always ask them why, and that kind of thing. So I'm going to read some of these comments that people are having. Emma Lynn says in Newfoundland, they use their FetLife profile numbers, the ones in URL. That's we already have a registry number, don't we? Interesting. That way we're not putting anyone's real name, etc. I think that's a good idea, but that's there. Like I said, I'm not a lawyer. I don't even play one on TV, so I'm sure there are smarter people than I who can do that. Leah says the incidents are lesser than consent violations, such as etiquette or boundary violations, which do not rise to the level of consent violation. Is there a part of your process to address the lesser violations? Yes. In fact, the entire process will address that. That's the point, is that if it is something as simple as a misunderstanding, it can be done that way. Or if it's a matter of where just an apology is something that somebody wants. So Chris has a disagreement here. When I talked about smarter people than me, he was one of the people I'm talking about. He says he disagrees if a legal issue arises, it's required anyway. The information is required anyway. Management can be called to account. This is valid information also, but it is intended to be confidential and owned by the management of the event, which also follows NCSF guidelines. Okay, if you say so, if there's not a legal problem with that, I'm currently in the situation of having run my first big event, and I have, in a very safe place guarded by ninja unicorns, all of the legal papers. And I was informed when I asked about my legal obligation that I need to keep those things safe for at least 3 years physically, and then I need to scan them and keep them an additional 4 to 7 years. And that's by other people who run events. That is just having their name, that they went to the event, their legal name and address. Looking at this chart where we have the room they stayed in, the scene name, their email address, phone number, and things like that. Chris, my talking to lawyers has indicated that would be problematic to have that attached to some kind of a consent violation that may end up in court. So yeah, if you have a legal basis for why this would totally be okay, I am all for it. I can only repeat what I have been told. So yeah, and Emmeline says the plan was to use the FetLife number as their membership number so that it couldn't be changed. JB, you're identifying the exact problem. Who would maintain the registry? Who could add to it? Who would be the unbiased person? The best we were able to come up with was sort of a double blind, where one group has the numbers matching to names, and another group has the numbers matching to what they were accused of. So there's never, you have to actually go through them. There's not one person who can match up the names and whatever incidents happened. Yeah, that's one of the things. Here's the thing. I came up with the Rashomon idea. That's the sort of the easier part of this particular big thorny problem. I see these bigger issues of the idea of registry and things like that. That's ask me about that in a few years, okay? Because I recognize the problem, but I don't think that this is actually a thing that the Rashomon can do, except in terms of that record. We have a question from Flickr, and Flickr, I actually have an entire slide dedicated to your question later on. So if A calls in a Rashomon because of a bad interaction with person B always told that something happened even if person A isn't identified? Well, so here's the thing. It would be if A calls in a Rashomon because a bad interaction happened, it would be a the word I'm trying to think of what the words I'm looking for. It would be a breach of trust to do nothing. Okay, to just it would be a breach of trust to say, well, this person doesn't want anyone else to know about it, so therefore we're going to go ahead and let this person go on and continue their behavior and possibly hurt other people. So I think that the person B, yes, has to be told that something happened. It may simply be a matter of saying, just so you know, we've had some reports of some problematic behavior from you. You may find security kind of keeping an eye on you, just so you know that's for your safety as well as others. Something like that, something friendly. And just that idea of knowing that they are watched can often be enough to change that behavior. You know, I understand being afraid of a community shitstorm, but I'm going to say that in the realm of weighing community shitstorm versus consent violation, additional consent violation, more harm coming to someone, I'm going to say that the shitstorm is going to have to go ahead and happen. So that's my own personal opinion on that. Again, it's not a perfect system, but in an ideal world, the person B, yes, you know, did something and they didn't realize that they did something wrong. And so just telling them, hey, something happened, can let them know and give them a chance to change their behavior. Then we're getting into other things about liability, and we're getting into more legalese stuff. I want to get back and focus more on the idea of reducing harm to people, and also we still have the actual incident itself to talk about, the one that actually happened. So I'm going to go on. We'll also have more. So you talk about this is the logistics that you were asking about earlier. I think, Miss L, I think you were asking. So here's what we had in terms of the nuts and bolts of things. We had a staff of 4 Rashomon. That was Eternal Angel, Iron Temple Dog, Lonnie Angel, and myself. Now, me being a Rashomon was kind of breaking my own rules because I was also managing the event. I was also helping teach several classes, so I was definitely, but one of the ways we got around that was that I was the Rashomon on duty during like the sleep times, during the times when there were not likely, when the dungeon was closed. So that gave the others a little bit. At any given time, we had a Rashomon who was on duty and another one who was on call. Now the on-duty Rashomon sat at the help desk and was right there, absolutely ready to act at any given time. We did give them a secondary job of helping out in negotiations. Nobody took us up on that particular thing, but we wanted to have, you know, something positive other than just, you know, react to something bad happening. The on-call Rashomon was able to like go to classes or, you know, go and have dinner or hang out with friends or whatever. They were not able to go and have scenes. They had to be ready to be called on at any given time because of the fact that they, you know, as you said, you know, what if one person has a consent incident and then somebody else has a consent incident? You know, we need to have backup. Now, obviously, we have to reach a certain point when we can't have any more backups. And so, you know, we just did the best we could. All of the Rashomon considered themselves to sort of be on call at all times if there had been a situation where there were multiple consent violations or multiple people needing it. We thought that we would have that covered. We also had our diversity and accessibility coordinator who was ready to jump in at a moment's notice. And we had sort of talked to the medical staff and the security staff about it. I'll get to that in a second. The Rashomon on duty and on call both had radios. And those radios both had a channel that was dedicated to the Rashomon and also a channel that connected with the rest of staff, like security and stuff like that. So that involved a little bit of, you know, radio protocol training and things like that. We even had special codes We had code 1, code 2, code 3, and a fourth code that I won't mention the name of because it could be kind of disrespectful, but it rhymed with code blue. The codes were, code 1 was, hey, there was something happened, I got it, don't worry. Code 2 was, hey, something happened and I might need your help, so be ready to come if I need you. You know, that kind of thing. That would, so the on-duty Rashomon would say to, would come and say, hey, Iron Temple Dog, just so you know, I got a code 2 here. I'll be in touch. Okay, and at that point, Iron Temple Dog knows, hey, I'm just going to be ready to go at a moment's notice because they might need my help. A code 3 was, I can't handle this. I need your help now. And that was just for the on-call Rashomon, the on-duty. So they, at that point, Iron Temple Dog, let's say he was on call, would just get up and go to where they were and provide whatever support was needed. The last one, the kind of emergency, is kind of similar to the Dr. All-Come that you'd have at hospitals. And that one meant that any Rashomon that heard that, any staff member, any security, that was a, hey, Rube, we need people here. Thank goodness we didn't actually need that. Actually, we didn't need any of the actual codes because the one incident we had happened right in front of several other Rashomon at the time. But we were ready with that. We did have integration with security and medical staff. As you will hear, that is something we could have done better. We definitely did talk with them about it beforehand, but I think we needed to have more things like that. And Chris says they do not have the cool codes though. Yeah, the codes are basically created so that we didn't panic people, so we didn't have, come over the radio, we have a consent incident in the blue dungeon, and then everybody rushes to the blue dungeon. We also did spend some time scouting local resources. I mentioned safeaustin.org. Also, we had a member of the staff who was a former police officer, and so we had good contacts within the police department. They were BDSM aware. They knew our event was going on, and if something had happened, they would have been ready to help out. We also had a medical team that we absolutely could rely on. Kink Medic is an awesome person to have on your team. And we had a diverse and experienced staff. I was the least experienced in terms of counseling, communication, and things like that. Our staff had a lot of training in many different aspects of nonviolent communication, mediation, and all kinds of things. And as I said, we tried to make it so that we couldn't necessarily be able to match any particular demographic of person that felt comfortable, but at least we'd be able to change from one that they were uncomfortable with. So if they were uncomfortable talking with a male, we could have them talk with someone who is female body. If they were uncomfortable talking to someone who presented as het, they could talk with someone who presented as queer, and those kinds of things. So we did that as much as possible, but it was intentional. That's how we did that. And I guess I will wait and ask any questions about this particular logistics before we go into the actual case study that happened. Miss L, especially you, I know you wanted to know how many people we would have on call and how that would work. I will post the actual duty roster that we set up. I will tell you, we spent a lot of time on duty and on call. I was really impressed. I was worried that people were going to burn out, and they didn't. They were totally willing to do things. And we even had some people like say, oh, hey, I really want to go to this class. Eternal Angel, can you take this shift for me? And Eternal Angel says, oh, sure, I can. That way I can do this scene with Murphy Blue later on, things like that. So, and we did spend a lot of time going over what we thought would be worst case scenarios and situations. Interestingly enough, and you're about to find out about this, unless people have other questions, we're going to go on to the actual case study. Interestingly enough, it wasn't the worst case scenarios that we needed to have more practice with. It turned out that what we needed was more practice with the not worst case scenarios. As I think it was Leah or said earlier, the idea of things that aren't full-fledged things. If I was able to make this into a more robust training, I would create several scenarios to role play with people that would run the gamut of these things. And that would be, that would be the thing is not just to go for the things that are the worst case, but also go for the things that are normal, because those might be the things that that fall off. And Gaius says that scheduling can always be worked out. The Gaius, I'm assuming, because that's a male Roman name, I'm going to assume your gender is male. And you say the scheduling can always be worked out. Yeah, honestly, if somebody's going to volunteer to do a job like this, they're not going to balk at doing other, changing things around. So it's story time, not fun story time, unfortunately. This is by the way, a Japanese wood print of the Rashomon Gate is actually where there's old folk tales about demons and things like that. So don't know much about that particular thing, but the graphic looks interesting. And just so we can be clear, we chose the names Jesse and Blair because they are not the names of the people involved, and they are also gender neutral. So we have changed the names of the people involved. I will tell you, this event, this did happen at the only event where there were Rashomon. This is kind of like that, will the person be notified about things? Well, if I tell you that this is an incident that happened at a place where there's the Rashomon, and the Rashomon have only been at one place, you know where it happened. It was at Ropecraft. And I do have the permission of both parties involved to share this story, as well as Eternal Angel's permission to reference her report. I have read her report in its entirety on my podcast. I'm not going to do that right here. I'm going to summarize the things that happened. Yeah, if you want more information about this, I can definitely give it to you. Okay, so here's what happened. Real quick. Rashomon training at the point is in the books. Kabi, I'll deal with that in a little bit. The answer is maybe. Sounds like we had a similar situation. Chris had a similar setup with Test Fest. So here's what happened. On Saturday night, Jesse saw Blair and thought that Blair was stalking them, and actually thought that Blair was an ex from about 6 years ago, back in their hometown. And so Jesse felt that Blair was up to their old shenanigans of harassing and stalking, and so Jesse notified security. At that point, security went up to Blair and said, "I see what you're doing. You need to stop doing that. Don't mess around or we're going to kick you out of the event." This is the common protocol people have, is that if someone is accused of something, you go up to them and you say, "The person that was accused, we see what's going on, and this is a bad thing." You notice I did not say that security called the Rashomon. Security did not call the Rashomon. In fact, the particular security person didn't even tell the rest of the security team, and this was a big misstep in the whole process. But to me, is why I say we really needed to integrate more. The security person said later on that they did not feel that stalking counted as a consent violation. But it definitely did. It definitely was the kind of thing that the Rashomon could be part of. So that was that was our bad for not putting that out there better. After security warned Blair, by the way, security did not say, "Blair, I want you to stay away from Jesse." This falls into that whole not telling who was reporting and stuff like that. Just said, "Blair, you need to stop what you're doing." No further action, no other reporting, no talking to Rashomon, nothing else was done Saturday night or Saturday day. And he goes into Sunday night, and during the day on Sunday, Blair had continued the same behavior. In fact, Blair had been walking past Jesse and Jesse's friend for a while, and Jesse had felt that Blair was deliberately provoking and kind of showing off, and asked the friend, Do you think that that guy, person is actually doing that on purpose? And Jesse's friend said, yeah, I think that that person is doing that. I think that's definitely happening. And so as a result, Jesse's anxiety increased. Again, Jesse said to security, hey, I know you warned Blair, but Blair is still doing the same thing. And so security, again, confronted Blair and demanded to see Blair's legal ID. I should add another reason. Blair's scene name on the badge was slightly similar to the name of the person who Jesse's ex, who had done those kinds of stalking behaviors in the past. Security was confronting Blair and demanded to see the legal ID. Blair, at this point, is really on the defensive and is like, wait, you can't see my ID. I'm deliberately being anonymous here. This is not the place where you can demand that. And started to get more confrontational. As that happens, Jesse's anxiety increases. This is all happening Sunday night in the hallway outside the dungeon. And Jesse has a group of friends gather around as support. Unfortunately, the friends' support was sort of along the lines of, well, if Blair comes anywhere near, we're going to kick Blair's ass. We are going to totally make sure that, we'll get them banned from the events. We'll do these kinds of threats and antagonistic thing. And this was going on. Now, at this point is when, finally, this was happening in the hallway. At this point, seated at the help desk was a Rashomon, Eternal Angel, in fact. And watching what was going on, the Rashomon says, I think there's some problems here. So the Rashomon went up to Jesse and said, hey, I can tell you're upset. Would you like to take a couple of your friends with me and we can go to this safe room and we can talk about what's happening? At the same time as they were sort of heading towards the room, the Rashomon, where the Rashomon was going to begin the first interview, I was notified at that time. I was out in the hallway as well. I could see something was going on, and I asked Eternal Angel, and Eternal Angel said, well, it looks to me like Jesse believes that Blair is the ex that was stalking them back in their hometown, and therefore it's a problem. And so I said, okay, I'll handle things out here while you do the interview. So I got security and I said, I want you to make sure you have eyes on Blair from now on until this is resolved. And I went up to Blair and I used the non-judgmental kind of thing like that. I said, hey, just so you know, there's some worry about your being someone who does this thing. Do you mind if I look at your ID just so that we can, maybe nip this thing in the bud or whatever? And I asked it in that way. And I did get to look at the ID, and it was not the person that Jesse, did not match the name. Now, security's first response to that was, well, if I was going to stalk somebody, I'd have a fake ID. However, it was determined that while they might have a fake ID, they would probably not have a fake driver's license, a fake governmental ID, fake business cards, fake checkbook, and fake friends who could all verify their actual name. And in fact, it turned out that that Blair was not the person that Jesse thought that they were. It was a matter of, after 6 years, the physicality of the person was similar, of Blair was similar. And as I said, the name had something similar, and it triggered sort of a PTSD episode in Jesse to where they were convinced that this was happening. And the friends wanted to support Jesse and not try and say you're wrong or whatever. So they actually exacerbated that as going in there as, supporting. And that's not to put down the friends. They were wonderful, great support. And this is something I can tell you. Eternal Angel wrote in her report that the support people that were there with Jesse were incredibly helpful. So this was definitely a good situation, but it is a warning sign to note that sometimes what we think is the supportive way to get through things is not necessarily going to be the best action. So this is also where I talked about people gaslighting themselves. Jesse was entirely believed that Blair was not the person that they thought they were, but that made Jesse feel that they couldn't trust their own judgment, that they were, somehow, that they couldn't believe their eyes, that they, were somehow broken in that way. And the role of the Rashomon at that point was to say, no, this is totally understandable. This is a situation where you had a triggering episode, and you went to the people that you wanted to have help you, and they tried to help you, and now we know what's going on. But the feelings were valid, even though the identity wasn't accurate. Now, what I think is one of the best parts about this story is that Jesse was set to participate in a special event later on that particular evening. And I was going to go to Blair and say, look, would you mind maybe not attending that special event? And before I could even suggest it. And I felt bad suggesting it because, again, Blair was innocent. Blair was not this person. Before I could even say that, Blair said, hey, I'm not going to go to that special event. I understand what PTSD is like. I really am sorry that Jesse's going through that. I will do whatever I can to make this event more comfortable for them, including saying, hey, by the way, they need to know that I'm going to be at other rope events, so they're going to see me again. And I hope that it won't have the same traumatic effect. I mean, it was a very, very supportive and allied way to react to that. And as I said, the Rashomon, and in that way, the Rashomon and the other person who was accused were reassuring Jesse that their reaction was valid. Here's the other situation that we were surprised at. So you've heard about me being part of this, and you've heard about Eternal Angel being part of this. So that's two staff members. I wasn't actually the on-call Rashomon. Iron Temple Dog was the on-call Rashomon. And the thing was that he had to do a different task, which was that there had been people who were witness to the initial group of friends getting very agitated around Jesse and the security confrontation with Blair, and things were getting, they were traumatized by that. And so Iron Temple Dog was actually out providing, I'm going to call it aftercare, but it was support and reinforcement for the people that were the witnesses that had seen things and that needed to have talks. And in one case, it was a volunteer who needed to basically be relieved from their shift so they could go recover in private. The aftercare for the also the Rashomon themselves. I mean, this whole thing happening. I mean, there was that moment of, oh shit, we thought we had made it all the way through the event with nothing happening, and now our protocol is being put to the test. And everybody did this. What about the deliberately provoking behavior on the part? Okay, JB asked a question. Okay, and I guess no audio. Can other people hear this? I'm going to wait and see what's going on here before I continue answering. But I'm hoping you are all getting audio. And that, yes, it's just a matter of your internet connection. So, no audio. Okay, Emma Lynn says she can hear. Okay, just JB, answering your question. All right, so JB says, I've listened to your podcast about the incident as well, and I am plagued with a question, what about the deliberately provoking behavior on the part of Blair, the stalking, following, etc.? Okay, so remember what security had said to Blair in the first place. They had said, hey, we know what you're doing, you need to stop it. There was no notification of, you need to stay away from this particular person, you need to stop stalking. Okay, there was nothing. the thing is that Blair had no way to change whatever behavior, and the fact was the behavior was just that Blair was at a rope event. Yes, Blair was carousing in the hallway, but that's because Blair was having fun at a rope event. Lots of people carouse in the hallway. Because Jesse saw Blair as a threat, that behavior was interpreted as threatening, and when Jesse would talk to the friend would support Jesse's interpretation. But actually, Blair was just being Blair. There wasn't actually stalking going on. It's a case of looking at Blair through the lens of Blair as a stalker. Well, any behavior is going to become suspicious. I mean, when Blair volunteered the driver's license because security still thought of Blair as a stalker, the initial reaction is, well, it must be a fake. Okay, so I understand your question. There wasn't actually the thing that ended up being was that there wasn't actually stalking behavior. It was just a matter of they happened to be in the same proximity. And if you think about it, if Blair had been told you need to stay away from Jesse, well, then Blair could have actually done that. But since Blair wasn't told what behavior to change, purely through coincidence, they're going to end up being around Jesse or not being around Jesse. And anytime they're around Jesse, Jesse will think, well, Blair has been told not to be around me, and Blair is around me, so therefore Blair is stalking. Okay, this cascading misinformation is the problem here. So what could we have done better? We could have integrated with security better. We could have had the Rashomon come in earlier, and that would have been because we would have the attendees would have known better. Either Jesse or Jesse's friends would have said, hey, we should talk to a Rashomon about this kind of stuff. This is a consent violation. And this is not to say they did anything wrong. This is to say we did something wrong by not making them aware of this resource. Okay, so that's those are our information, our things. We also thought that perhaps instead of negotiation, one of the tasks that a Rashomon can have is a way to model constructive support and constructive reactions to that kind of thing. One of the hardest things to do when you are told, hey, we think there may have been a consent violation with you, is to actually come at it with a, maybe you're right, let's talk about this, as opposed to an defensive, oh my God, no. Or if you hear about somebody else who is reported to have done a consent violation, oftentimes your first reaction is, there's no way they could have done that. And so one of the roles of the Rashomon perhaps could be helping to educate people in, sometimes you have to, be aware that good friends can do bad things, and that just is something that sometimes happens. As you may have gathered, we need a larger support staff. We needed to have either more Rashomon on duty, more Rashomon ready, or I'm not sure exactly how large that can be. I'm probably going to have to consult more with medical teams and see what kinds of backups they have in terms of that. So this is my, I don't know why they had that thing there. Huh, that's interesting. I don't know what that is doing there. All right, so we'll just leave that there. These are several of the resources that are on there. And you can feel free there. I also, as I said, this is free of charge. I'm not even going to try and sell you anything, but if you do feel like trying to support the work that I'm doing and stuff like that, there's a couple of ways you can donate there too. So I'm going over here to questions. Chris says, how do you think the responsibility of dealing with issues of concern between parties should be balanced between security and incident responders? Consent to conflict may help people go to the Rashomon sooner. I'm going to ask you, Heather, in a moment to unpack that a little more. Chris, I'll answer yours first, although you just added something in there. He says, I think it's important overall for us to use more accurate language when it comes to identifying problematic behaviors. If we call everything a consent violation, that is a problem. Just as the security person in the case of Jesse's complaint did not think the issue was a consent problem. Yes, I entirely agree. That's why I do not use the word consent violation. unless it has been determined beyond a shadow of a doubt. I use the word consent incident. That means that something happened. That is where we start from. Something happened, and that totally validates both sides. And again, here I am slipping into the sides thing. The problem is people say, well, you can't call it a consent violation because it doesn't do that. And other people say, well, this person knows if they were violated or not. And if I wanted to split hairs, I'd say this person knows whether or not they feel violated or not. And that needs to be valid. And Chris, well, here's the thing. If it was stalking, it would have been a consent problem. Chris says it was not a consent problem in this particular case. It actually wasn't. In fact, because it wasn't actually the person. If that had been the person, then it would have been one. So I'm going to go into, do you think including the term consent is part of the issue? I don't think I agree that it is part of the issue, because I do think that stalking is a consent issue. It's a term of I have a boundary of I don't want you following me, and you're breaking the boundary. Chris, you said that consent violations or from boundary violations, from etiquette violations. I don't like the word violations, and that may be the one problem that we have. I think that an incident is a better way to put it. So I'm going to, before, Chris, I'll let you go ahead and maybe offer the ideas, but let me address Flickr's thing first, because I gave you your own slide. Flickr contacted me before this and asked what are the challenges of local events. And by the way, I want to apologize because this is absolutely the worst PowerPoint slide I've ever done because it's so tiny text. And I'm going to read it out because that helps play into my answer. Now, if you were to apply this idea to a repeated event like a play party, you would be able to take history into account. And the hypothesis, Flickr, I hope you don't mind, I numerically change this around. Person A has a bad encounter with person Z. Person Z is a leader of the community, and in any event, it was a minor thing. Person A really doesn't want to confront person Z or even alert them to the fact that a complaint has been lodged. They just want the event leaders to keep an eye on person Z. The same thing happens with persons B through Q. Finally, person R says, yes, I want to make a formal complaint. And then what happened to person R was not good, but still relatively minor. But the event organizers know about the history of person C. They are a missing stair. And the missing stair, I'll let you look up that particular thought model because I'm not adequate to explain it correctly. But she asked how that, and I'm sorry if Flickr, how does this all play out in the Rashomon model? And Flickr, you answered their own question, which said you listen to them and ask what they need, and perhaps what they need is just to be heard, but to have everything kept confidential. Now, I've already addressed the idea of I don't think that confidentiality that can result in more people in the community being harmed is a good solution. That is my opinion. But the short answer to this is that this is not what the Rashomon is designed to fix. The Rashomon is that part where you say you listen to them, ask what they need, and then try and find a constructive path forward. So the idea of the history of people and event leaders keeping an eye on things, those are things for the event to work on. It is beyond the scope of what I imagine the Rashomon to be doing. I feel like I don't want to get into what's known as scope creep, where we say, hey, why don't we have them do this too, and do this too, and do this too. So I do believe that the answer to your question is that can you do it on a smaller event model? Yes, absolutely. You totally can do it in a recurring play party. And I think that would be wonderful. It would be the same as you could have a medic at a play party. And you may tell the medic, hey, I know you're not going to drink. If you have your gig bag, can you just be around in case something happens? That could be that level of interaction. So I hope that answers your question. So Heather and Chris are getting in here. and talking about how it being broad or not. And I agree that I think incidence is important. Chris, I think the idea of consent, using consent, I agree with you that consent in its actual idea, its actual space is probably not exactly what we mean. However, I also think it's become a broad umbrella under which a lot of these things like boundaries and etiquette and stuff like that is brought under. And I think that, like Heather says, that in terms of the, that's the thing, you say if you're accused of a consent incident, when it's an etiquette incident, it would matter. Here's the thing, nobody can be accused of a consent incident. A consent incident is not an accusation. A consent incident says something happened. That's it. And that's why I think incident is better. I think that boundaries and etiquette and things like that, I do see what you mean in that when you use the term consent, it can be a little bit more inflammatory. But in this case, I'm going to also fall on the side of the person who may or may not be the victim, in that if you say to them, oh, you're saying it was a consent violation, well, actually, that was an etiquette incident, that really lessens things. If we keep the word consent in there, it shows that yes, we do take this seriously, but we use incident as the other side. So I agree it's a problem for people accused, but it's a problem. To me, it seems like a more minor problem than the idea, which has been the case in the past, of not taking the person accusing seriously enough. Maybe at some point we'll reach a point where we have done that long enough that we can then go back to trying to make, I do want everyone to be comfortable. I'm not sure that would, maybe it'd be a case where this is where we need to do some research. We say to people, how do you feel about the following statements? You have been accused of a consent incident, or how do you feel when you have had a situation where you think your consent has been violated, and you go to the person and they say, it's obviously an etiquette incident, we'll take care of that. Do you feel validated, or do you feel that they're lessening it? This might be the place where research. Why use any term, Emmeline says. That's a good question. I'm not sure. We have to say that something happened. You mean just use the word incident, maybe? Before I answer that, Emmeline, I'm going to answer JB's question. I haven't been ignoring you, JB. How is the Rashomon being embraced or not by event organizers? And if not, how do we encourage their use? Well, that's a good question. I have 24 people online right now, and I have 74 people are online, right, are total registered that want to see this. So I'm happy to say the interest is here. Also, this was originally set up to be a kind of a event, a talk. Sorry, it's getting to be 11 p.m. here, and so I'm getting a little bit spacey. It was originally designed to be a talk at the leadership conference. I wasn't able to attend the leadership conference because I had death in the family. So this is the talk that would have been done there. So I think it is. A matter of being here. I am perfectly willing to add this to my list of current classes that I offer. I do not think that this presentation would be enough to have as training. I think that the actual training would need to have some more direct training in nonviolent communication techniques and interviewing techniques, including a lot of role plays. I think that would be essential, and I'm pretty sure that my fellow Rashomon that have done this would agree with me. I have been approached to go to Toronto and do some training. I might be going early to the Toronto GRU later on in the year and doing a training up there. If someone is interested in becoming to train or interested in supporting this work, well, that's part of why I put up those donations there. I don't have the disposable income to do this all the time, but I definitely think it'd be worth. Yeah, Chris says, I think this type of work requires a particular set of skills. Yeah, I have to agree. I think that not everybody is cut out to be a Rashomon. And I think I both want this stuff out there, but I also worry that somebody's going to look at these slides and say, oh, I can do this, and then end up with something bad happening. But, you can't control information. Can't stop the signal, right? Here's the other thing. The talk about the incidents and the consent violation, using the word violation and consent violation in the names and things like that. To a certain extent, I feel like focusing on that is letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. Yes, Heather, training in Toronto. I feel like this, we need more stuff. We've had exactly 4 people that have been trained in this, and we have now a few documents that have been written by me, including a podcast, and we have now this video. And that is not enough data to really say whether or not this even works. I think it's a step in the right direction, but I would be much happier if there was something that was better comes along. So if you know of people that you think should try this kind of thing, I would rather, if they were going to use the term Rashomon, that they contact me about, the kinds of trainings that we're doing, so we can just make sure we're on the same page. This is the kind of thing that Chris Marks and I have been talking about. I'm perfectly happy to help facilitate that as best I can. So hopefully that answers your question. Are there any other questions? We have about 5 minutes left. You see the things I have up there as far as the links. I can also tell you that I don't think it's up yet. Yeah, it's not quite up yet. I have actually secured a domain name that will be having as a resource. So I will let everyone know about this. You will also be getting an email that has the replay link. You are perfectly welcome to share that replay link with anybody you like. I will charge them the same thing I charged you, nothing. Chris, are you talking about you have 3 Rashomon or 3 consent resolution facilitators? To make sure that that's what you meant. So I think one of the first things I'd love to do is I'd love for me and Chris Marks to get together with some beverages of our choice, and maybe even with our Rashomon, and getting it. And Gaia says, how about a training before Ramble group? That is really, really possible, Gaius, because I'm going to be at an event right before Ramble grew. So I'm actually going to be in the DC area right before that, for the week before then. So yes. So Emma Lynn has one last question. Does the same person interview with the accused and the accusing, or should it be 2 separate people and then have them talk? The answer is yes. In the incident that I talked about, as I mentioned, Jesse was originally interviewed by Eternal Angel, and I talked to Blair. Eternal Angel did then go and talk to Blair also, and then Eternal Angel and I both talked together. So that was going on. Gaius asks, when will we be able to get the slides from this? When I figure out what the website, why the website isn't up yet, it will be at Rashomon, RASHOMON.info. And that will be the website. It is, if you go there right now, it'll say this website cannot be found. I'm not sure why. I did buy it just an hour before this and set up WordPress on it, so it should be working right, just perfectly, right? I haven't had time to troubleshoot that, but that will be where the slides will be. The video will be there, as well as the other writings. and further writings. I'm hoping I can also, Chris, I can put your thing up there, and also hopefully have contact information. Big kudos to Chris Marsh for drawing on Eternal Angel as a resource to head up at Test Fest, the thing. So, or to be joining them for their thing. So the people are the resources as well. So thank you guys for coming tonight. I'm going to sign off. And if you're watching this on a replay, obviously you can't type in questions here, but there should be a space where you can go ahead and type in more questions. They will be emailed to me, and I will answer them as best I can. So this will be an ongoing dialogue. Thank you, everyone, and I will hopefully see you all around the kink events. So I'll say good night.